This is Chapter 4, Part 2 of The Rape of the Mind by Just A. Merleau, M.D. I continued firm in my refusal. Suddenly, one of the officers started to slap me around the face and to beat me. Overwhelmed by surprise that they should display such fury over a bagatelle, I surrendered and signed the paper. From the Vichy prison to which I was sent, I was permitted to write a letter of protest to the Swiss government. I still carry the official apology I received. This sudden change from a mood of defiant resistance to one of submission must be explained by the unconscious action of contrasting feelings. Consciously, we tell ourselves to be strong, but from deep within us, the desire to give in and to comply begins to disturb us and to affect our behavior. In the psychology, this is described as the innate ambivalence of all feelings, the need to collapse. The vocabulary of psychopathology contains many sophisticated terms for the wish to succumb to mental pressure, such as wish to regress, dependency need, mental masochism, unconscious death wish, and many others. For our purposes, however, it is enough to state that every individual has two opposing needs which operate simultaneously: the need to be independent to oneself, and the need not to be oneself, not to be anybody at all, not to resist mental pressure. The need to be inconspicuous, to disappear, and to be swallowed up by society is a common one. In its simplest form, we can see it all around us as a tendency to conform. Under ordinary circumstances, the need for anonymity is balanced by the need for individuality, and the mentally healthy person is the one who can walk the fine line between them. But in the frightening, lonely situations in which the victims of menticidal terror find themselves, situations which have a nightmare quality, which are crammed with dangers so tremendous they cannot be grasped or understood because there is nobody to explain or reassure, the wish to collapse, to let go, to be not there becomes almost irresistible. This experience was reported by many concentration camp victims. They had come into camp with one unanswered question burning in their minds: why has all this happened to me? Their need for a sense of direction, for a feeling of purpose and meaning, was unsatisfied, and hence they could not maintain their personalities. They let themselves go in what psychopathology calls a depersonalization syndrome, a general feeling of having lost complete control of themselves and their own existence. What Pavlovian conditioning can do in applying artificial confusion can be done too by one shocking experience. For what, they asked themselves, what is the meaning of all this suffering? And gradually they sank dully into that paralyzed state of semi-oblivion we call depression. The self-destructive needs take over. The Nazis were clever and unscrupulous in taking advantage of this need to collapse. The humiliation of concentration camp life, the repeated suggestion that the Allies were as good as beaten, these conspired to convince the inmates that there would be no end to this pointless suffering, no victorious conclusion to the war, no future to their lives. The desire to break down, to give in, becomes almost insurmountable when a man feels that this horrible, marginal existence is something permanent, that he cannot look toward a more personal goal, that he has to adjust to this dulling, degrading life forever. At the moment faith and hope disappear. Man breaks down. There are tragic stories of concentration camp victims who fixed all their expectations on the idea that liberation would come on Christmas 1944 and aimed their entire existence toward that date. When it passed and they were still incarcerated, many of them simply collapsed and died. This tendency to collapse also serves as a protective device against danger. The victim seems to think, if my torturer doesn't notice me, he will leave me alone. And yet this very feeling of anonymity, this sense of losing one's personality, of being useless, unnoticed, and unwanted, also results in depression and apathy. Man's need to be an individual can never be completely killed. The need for companionship. Not enough attention has been given to the psychology of loneliness, especially to the implications of enforced isolation of prisoners. When the sensory stimuli of everyday life are removed, man's entire personality may change. Social intercourse, our continual contact with our colleagues, our work, the newspapers, voices, traffic, our loved ones, and even those we don't like, all are daily nourishment for our senses and minds. We select what we find interesting, reject what we do not want to absorb. Every day, every citizen lives in many small worlds of exchange of gratifications, little hatreds, pleasant experiences, irritations, delights, and he needs these stimuli to keep him on the alert. Hour by hour, reality, in cooperation with our memory, integrates the millions of facts in our lives by repeating them over and over. As soon as man is alone, closed off from the world and from the news of what is going on, his mental activity is replaced by quite different processes. Long forgotten anxieties come to the surface. Long repressed memories knock on his mind from inside. His fantasy life begins to develop and assume gigantic proportions. He cannot evaluate or check his fantasies against the events of his ordinary days, and very soon they may take possession of him. I remember very clearly my own fantasies during that time I was in a Nazi prison. It was almost impossible for me to control my depressive thoughts of hopelessness. I had to tell myself over and over again, think, keep your senses alert, don't give in. I tried to use all my psychiatric knowledge to keep my mind in a state of relaxed mobilization, and on many days I felt it was a losing battle. Some experiments have shown that people who are deprived for even a very short time of all sensory stimuli, no touch, no hearing, no smell, no sight, quickly fall into a kind of hallucinatory hypnotic state. Isolation from the multitude of impressions that normally bombard us from the outside world creates strange and frightening symptoms. According to Heron, who performed experiments on a group of students at McGill University by placing each student in his own pitch-black soundproof room, ventilated with filtered air, and encasing his hands in heavy leather mittens and his feet in heavy boots, little by little their brains go dead or slip out of control. Even in 24 hours of such extreme sensual isolation, all the horror phantoms of childhood are awakened, and various pathological symptoms appear. Our instinct of curiosity demands continual feeding. If it is not satisfied, the internal hounds of hell are aroused. The prisoner kept in isolation, although his isolation is by no means as extreme as in the laboratory test, also undergoes a severe mental change. His guards and inquisitors become more and more his only source of contact with reality, with those stimuli he needs even more than bread. No wonder that he gradually gradually develops a particular submissive relationship to them. He is affected not only by his isolation from social contacts, but by sexual starvation as well. And I'll stop right there. That was part 2 of chapter 4 in The Rape of the Mind by Just A.M. Merleau.